Welcome back to Refactoring PaleoRose. My name is Tom. If you remember when we were evaluating the app, one of the interesting issues that came up was memory management. The experiment I did to find this issue was I simply opened extra documents, just like this. So I opened up 5 extra documents and I closed them again. And when looking at Xcode, took a look in the debug view, what we see is that the memory has just grown, but it didn't scale back as I deleted the file or deleted the documents. This is a problem, and this is something we don't want to move forward with because it's something that should be stable at this point as much as possible. So when we do make changes, we know we're not introducing something new. So to get started, I set up a card on our Kanban board for memory issues in the document. So since we're going to start working on it, let's move it over to in progress and set up a branch. Okay, here I'm in the repo proper. You can actually do this in Xcode if you want to, but I generally prefer the command line. So get checkout-b. I'm going to call it to-memory. Make sure we start with something clean. And so right now we're in a state where we can see that we have a memory issue. But before we get into a deep dive, let's do the easiest thing we can do. Let's just take a look at the document class and see if there's anything obvious that we can fix. So I happen to know that it is xrose document.m. And I'll go ahead and open the .h file as well. So the .h is the header, if you're not familiar with it, Objective-C, and then the .m is the implementation. If you look through here, we're not really creating any variables over here. So the memory issue isn't over here, but it might be over here. And so we have a number of properties. Again, this is going to be Objective-C 2.0 feature. And if we look through this list, we see most of them are NSObject derived. Even these custom items are NSObject derived. That's all well and good. So Arc will manage these pretty well, with one notable exception here. The SQLite memory store. Now this particular thing is a pointer. So we're applying Arc to just the pointer. We're not applying it to the underlying memory. So what we need to do is make sure that we're treating this SQLite data store properly. So if we look just below, we can see here in our initer that we are creating our memory store. The question is, do we have a corresponding close? Let's take a look. Let's just do a simple search. Oh, here we have one, but it's for this file, not the in-memory store. And here's another one, same. And we're starting to loop again. So we do not have a case where we're closing this. So why don't we just do that? Now, since this is an in-memory store, it's meant to, the role of this particular memory store is to store data associated with the document. Now we're going to be making a change in that at some point in the future, because I really don't necessarily want to keep using that. But for now, we need to handle it properly. So what we're going to do is deallocate this stuff. The deall method will be called when we try to deallocate this document. And one thing to be aware of, this is not something we have to call super for. Xcode and the compiler will handle it itself, so you don't have to do a super. It's kind of one of the weird exceptions where you don't have to call super. So all we need to do is tell SQLite to close. And we have to give it the pointer. So, and if you're wondering about the underscore in front here, this is a way to address this piece of memory without having to use the properties accessors. So I don't have to use that. Now, before we actually build and run and see if we solve anything, we have to figure out how we can tell. So let's go into the memory debugger and see if we are in fact holding on to these SQLite stores longer than we should. So remember, we opened a total of 6 documents, closed all of them but one. So let's take a look in here and see if we have anything that looks like SQLite. And here we go. We have a SQLite page cache. And you can see here we have 6 of them. So we had 1, opened 5, and closed 5. So we should only have 1 right now. But we have 6, and that's the total that we opened up. And that means we weren't properly deallocating that memory. So let's close and rebuild and try again. We're going to do the same thing and close them again. All right, let's do the memory debugger. This time we just have 1 remaining SQLite page cache. That means we now are properly closing that memory. Did we solve our problem up here? No. We still have some memory issues going on. This was only part of it, but it was a positive change. So let's go ahead and make a commit. I prefer using command line. So we only changed the 1 file. Okay, now we've committed. Okay, let's see if we can address this other memory problem that we can't seem to identify quite yet. So remember, we're opening 1 document when you launch the app, we open 5 more, and then we closed 5. So if we see then multiples of 6, because we open a total of 6, then we have a clue to what our problem is. So if we look over here on the left, we can see that we have 6 geometry controllers, we have 6 layer grids, 6 table view controllers, 6 rows views, 6 window controllers, and so on. And some of these other things are likely to be multiples of 6. So let's see if we can get some clues out of the memory debugger. Let's go with geometry controller. Now, one of these controllers is still active and still properly managed. The rest of them are likely to be retained cycles. A retained cycle is typically when you have 2 or more classes that have strong references to each other. Because they have strong references to each other, their retained counts can never drop to 0 because they will never actually release. This object called the geometry controller. In this particular case, it's owned by the rows window controller. And by the way, these controller names, they're not classic NS window controllers or NS view controllers. They're what we had before those things appeared on the scene, so they're just NS objects with the name controller. So these are playing some sort of role. Now, so what we're seeing here is a diagram of the memory. So this is cascading down from who owns what. So the Xrose Windows controller is pointing to array, which owns some storage, which then owns the view controller. Now, this is interesting over here. This means that the notification center is weakly pointing to the controllers. If we flip down here, we can see that in all of them. So the idea of the notification center pointing at our unit means that we are an observer. The geometry controller is observed as some sort of notification, or it's a publisher of a notification. Generally speaking, this app is using notifications a lot, where we should be using a different pattern and a different technology for that pattern. So I'm going to add that as a card to our notes to remove most notification center calls. We'll define that a little bit better later. But notification center isn't our problem, because you can see by this diagram the lengths are always weak. If the line here is light gray, it's a weak reference. If the line here is dark, like this one, it's a strong reference. So we have these strong references going on that is keeping this alive. If we go to the rows view, we're seeing a lot of strong references that are keeping it alive. But I'm suspicious primarily about this geometry controller. So let's take a quick look at who looks at this. It's interesting. So when I looked at this struck me as interesting. It's saying it's not retained. This might be a holdover from when this app was not ARC, automatic routine release. Or in the early days, if you did this with manual routine release, this was not retained. It's just you're setting a pointer and that's all you're doing. So that's why this text is here, and it's very curious that it's here. The question is that true? Is it really not being retained? So let's see where this is actually being stored. It's being stored here. It's not a property, but in automatic retain count in ARC, that's going to get retained. In manual reference counting, that would not be retained. So that's something we don't really want to do. So what way to fix that in ARC is make this weak. So now it's a weak reference. It's not going to update the retain counts. It's just going to point to that. And because we put weak there, it can go nil and it'll be fine. That makes me wonder if there's any other places we're doing that. So now this statement is true. Originally it was not when we first started looking at this, but now it is true. Let's just see if this was sufficient, because I have a feeling this is being done elsewhere. And close. Back to Xcode. Doesn't look like we solved everything. You can see, if you look really close, you can see some stair step downs that we may have made a contribution, but we haven't completely solved it. So in the layer, we're also seeing the same sort of thing. We're injecting geometry controller and we're setting it. And it's definitely not weak, so let's make that one weak. Let's go ahead and try it again. Okay, that didn't seem to solve it. But I am still suspicious of everything around this. Since I have this problem in one place, it's probably triggering somewhere else. Let's do a little bit tricky thing here and do an init in a regular expression. So we already made this weak, so that's taken care of. All right, so let's try this one more time. It's not really coming back down, but let's double check. I accidentally created one more, so we still have a lot of extra geometry controllers and other things. So this kind of bothers me. Let's take a look at the window controller. So here I'm just looking at maybe the outlets are causing problems. Oh. So this is the Xrose table controller. It's owned by a window controller, but it also is owning a window controller. So let's look at the table controller. Oh, that's the window controller. All right, so these are all strongly referencing all these views. We probably want to set these to weak. The reason why is that we're seeing these circular references because of this right here. So if these are all strong, the thing is the table controller is being owned by some of these as well. Let's see if this fixes our. Look at that. Now it's not staying high, it's actually starting to descend. Geometry controller is just one. Rose view, Rose window controller, property inspector, those are all down to one. I think the combination of the changes that we made are likely all good improvements. Now, what I might do is stage these separately because we know we made a big impact with the Rose table controller. So let's do that one as a single commit. So that only one change is staged. So let's commit that. So now it's just these. So let's go ahead and undo these for a moment. So these are errors that I haven't been seeing before, so I have to make a note of these. So again, we're doing the majority of the memory control here. The question is, do we want to go back and fix those other issues? And the answer is very likely yes, but it may not make a difference. So let's go back and re-implement those. There we go. This might cause problems, but let's go ahead and do a test real quick. Shouldn't make any difference because I don't think there's any tests wrapped around any of this. Okay, let's just add that. In case I forgot to mention, what I'm doing here is I have a specific branch and card number and then the message. All right. I think that handles most of the memory problems, at least for now. There's likely to be other memory problems out there as well, but for now we're doing okay. Okay, now that we have this work complete, let's get this work pushed up. Okay. Now we can move this card to done. Before we go, let's try to plan out the next few things. First of all, we want to get some bookkeeping things in order. So let's go ahead and deal with file organization. So let's just create an item here for that is something we want to take care of. We want to modernize the FOP list. Move deprecated build settings. Update all other build settings. So we want to get those current. The CI/CD system we want soon, but I want to get all this bookkeeping stuff in order before we start jumping on that. So it looks like we have our agenda for next few episodes. So we're going to attack that and move forward. So if you have any questions about this, the changes that we made today, go ahead and leave a comment. If you have any suggestions for making things better, you can make a comment for that as well. But for next time, we're going to start addressing at least one of these and try to make things a little bit more modern. Thank you, and come back again.